This is the walkthrough video for PCTC 2020-2021, round 2, question 5, sales office. Okay, so in this question, we're going to be given a series of stats for each employee in this office. And we essentially need to do some maths to calculate their total and print off the winner. Now, it's not that easy because if there's a tie, we then need to consider the fact that the ties are broken based off the amount of color sales that person has made. And I'm going to approach this problem in a probably slightly unique way. I just think that this is probably the fastest way to kind of write out and implement the logic. Obviously, it requires you being fluent with Python and the specific things I'm going to show you. But of course, that's the point of this, is to build up those skills and that experience so that when it comes to the real competition, you can bang out the solutions to something like this incredibly quickly. But anyway, yeah, so let's create a list of all the scores just to begin with, and that list is going to be empty. And then I'm going to take in a certain amount of inputs. How many inputs? Well, the first input is going to tell us how many further inputs we want. So let's just do a for loop. So for I in range int inputs, so this just kind of repeats the for loop for as many times as the number of our first input. And so let's take in the first input. So that's going to be the name of the person. Then that's going to be, I think it's black and white. No, it's color. And then it's going to be black and white. And then I'm going to take in that input and then split it on the space. And so what I've done here on line 4 is I've taken the input, split it on the space, and that essentially will create a list. For example, the list will contain, the first element will be Joe, the second element will be 1, and the third element will be 3. And I've taken those 3 elements and I've assigned those 3 elements to these 3 variable names respectively. So name is going to be equal to Joe in this case. C is going to be equal to whatever the second element was, so 1. And BW is going to be equal to whatever the third element was, so 3. And now what I'm going to do with this is, I guess firstly I need to convert C into an integer and BW into an integer. And now I can actually kind of deal with this. So the way I'm going to do this is, I think essentially if we can find a way to store the information of the points everyone has in our list called scores, then all we really need to do is we just need to sort the list scores. And once we sort the list scores, the very last element in this list is going to be the maximum score, and that's the score that we want to find the person's name of, and then print that name off to the screen. That may have been a bit confusing, but essentially the way we're going to solve this problem is not by just directly comparing everyone's scores. We're going to find a different way to store people's scores in a list, sort the list, and automatically the highest score is going to appear at the end of the list. So how are we going to store the scores? Well, we're going to store them as a tuple. The first element in the tuple is going to be their total score, so that's color plus black and white, except that they get 2 points for every color and 1 point for every black and white. So let's do 2 times color plus the amount of black and white sales. Then the second element in our tuple is going to be color, and the third element is going to be name. And we're going to now add this to our scores list. Now the reason we're doing it this way is because when you sort a list in Python, if you sort a list of just numbers, it's obviously just going to sort the numbers from lowest to highest. If you sort a list of tuples, which is what we're doing here, then it's going to sort the list, but it's going to prioritize the first element in the tuple. And if there are tie breaks, it's then going to prioritize the second element in the tuple. If there are still tie breaks, it's going to prioritize the third, and so on. And so by using a tuple, we can essentially say that, Python, I want you to sort my list. How do I want you to sort it? I want you to sort it by first considering this value, and this is the person's overall score. But if there are tie breaks, then what's Python going to do? Well, the fact that, Python's going to look at the next element in our tuple. It's going to look at C. And we're told in the question that C is indeed going to be our tiebreaker value. And so this is a really neat way of kind of storing this information, such that all we now need to do is do scores.sort, and then the answer score, or the person with the highest score, is going to appear at the end of the list, because sorting a list is always going in ascending order. And so if we take scores minus 1, the last element of the list, we now want to extract the name. Because remember, this is still a tuple. This is still a tuple of their score, the color, and then the name. So to extract the name from this tuple, let's take the third element, so that's index 2. Index 2 is, remember, the name that we saved earlier. And then we can just print this off to the screen. Now this concept is a little confusing, so do take time to pause the video, copy this code and print things off at various points in the code so you understand what each point in the code does and you understand why this works, because this is a weird concept if you're completely brand new to it, but once you know about it and understand it properly, you can apply it really easily to so many problems, and then you can solve a question like this, a question 5, in literally like a minute or two. And so I really like this idea of essentially finding a way to store information in Python in a list, so that all we need to do to find the winner is just sorting a list. Now, I will say one reason that this works in this specific case is because the number of employees here we can see in the constraints is limited to 100. And sorting a list of 100 tuples, where each tuple only contains 2 or 3 elements, isn't very difficult for Python. It's inefficient, but that can still ultimately be done in milliseconds. Whereas if there were like 1 million employees, then our code isn't going to be fast enough, and we are going to have to try and come up with a different method. So if your inputs are huge and your list is huge, then you can't kind of just use this hacky way of storing data in a certain way to then just sort it, because sorting is a really, really, really inefficient operation to do in Python. So yeah, if your input is huge, if your list is huge, you won't be able to sort it in the time limit of the question. But in this case, our input's only 100 names long at most, and so we can indeed sort it, and then we do get 10 out of 10.